Good morning. So I wanted to ask us all to take a few moments of silence right now in honor of Pride Month, which in the face of the continuing challenge of being proud in a world that has once again, in too many cases, turned toward violence against the LGBTQ community, in particular the trans community. May all our friends and our loved ones in this month of celebration be safe and free from suffering. Thank you. So whenever I'm preparing to give a talk, I start reflecting on what's up for me these days. And so for today's talk, one of the answers arrived during Zazen the other morning in the form of a visual image with myself naturally at the center of a confluence of massive liquid forces, like rivers or pipelines. And these forces were coming not only at me, but passing through me. Now, if I were still in therapy, my dear therapist would probably ask me, what that might be about, and perhaps suggest it had something to do with my leaving Zen Center soon, beginning of next year. And because of that major life change, my unconscious is offering me an opportunity to reflect on the major influences on my life possible. So one of those massive liquid forces I interpreted as the river of the Buddha's teaching, the Buddha Dharma, arriving from the West. Having traveled throughout East Asia for over 2,500 years from its headwaters in northern India and the birth of a baby Buddha. And the second major flowing force recently returned into my personal life stream has its headwaters in the Middle East, precisely in the town of Bethlehem, having much to do with the beginnings of a tradition that started 2,000 years ago with the birth of the baby Jesus. So stories and celebrations of Jesus as the Son of God were a big part of my childhood, my early formation, and how I came to be a human being up to a certain age, how I understood what a human being was and where we came from and who made us. And then there's the third river, which I see as the oldest and the deepest of them all, carrying with it the call of home. Not home as in my own home. We are all immigrants here, but rather as the place where we have come from, our natal waters, so to speak. So that river has been flowing over all the lands of the earth for about 300,000 years, from its headwaters in the continent of Africa, the birthplace of what we call humankind, or what science has called since 1735, Homo sapiens, wise humans. So that massive river may continue its flow of wise humans unless we completely forget what it is that we are here to do and who we are going to be doing it with. So on reflection, what the story of these three rivers has given me is an opportunity to appreciate the values that I hold as a person in the world, where those values came from, as well as the possibility of renewing my commitment to them. Next year, I, along with a number of my Zen comrades, will be again living in an intentional community, somewhat like this one. Only the values of that community, like those carried by the rivers of my dream, will be coming from those varieties of directions. As some of you know, our new home, located north of Marin, is called Enso Village, with its own unique origin story. A story of the ongoing collaboration between the Zen Center and a nonprofit organization called Kendall Corporation. Kendall Corporation was founded by and is devoted to Quaker values. In other words, our Zen Buddhist stream from the West is conjoining with the Quaker stream from the East to create a communal living opportunity based in the values of both. As we now are consciously beginning to plan just how we human beings are going to live together harmoniously to the end of our days, perhaps even forging a new communal model that will be an inspiration to others, not just a privileged few. So to add a little more texture to my effort to try and understand the source of shared human values, I want to say a little more about that third massive river, the life stream of our humanity that brought all of us here today together. So one regrettable aspect of our humanity is how easily we have forgotten our ancestral home, our common ground. As over millennia, we have splintered into tribes and countries and empires, intent throughout human history on dominating one another, including domination over one another's values. These added textures to my exploration about my own personal values are a result of some recent encounters that I've had just this past week with some very inspiring art and inspiring teachings given by inspiring members of our human species who identify closely with our common ancestry. The songs and paintings that I witnessed this week are devoted to remembering that every human child belongs here on the earth and deserves all the support that they can get to stay here in safety and in good health for as long as they live, and in whatever form they choose to appear. So the inspired art, which you can go see by yourselves, is at the De Young Museum right now. Maybe some of you have already been. It was created by Kehinde Wiley, who, as his biography says, draws his own inspiration from a confluence of Renaissance painting, Islamic architecture, African textile design, contemporary fashion, and urban hip-hop. An inspiration that results in heroic portraits of young, both African and African-American men and women that he has encountered on the streets of the cities where he has lived. Portraits that bring our attention, meaning white people like me, to the pervasive lack of a dignified representation of people of color in Western art. So spending time with these paintings and sculptures was very much like spending time in this endo, or in a church, or a synagogue, or a mosque. It felt like sacred space for contemplating our human capacity for the conjoined twins of great love and great sorrow. A sacred love that leaves no one and no thing out, just like reality itself, all inclusive. So the other textural piece that has influenced me this morning also took place earlier this week on Juneteenth, Monday, Juneteenth, when I, along with just about every minister, priest, imam, and rabbi from every denomination in Marin, had gathered at the Senior Center in Marin City for a prayer breakfast. The message that morning, and the message this morning, and the message that the confluence of the great rivers has been trying to spread is a simple one. Stop hating each other. Stop lusting after each other and each other's stuff. And stop living a life of ignorance, born of delusion. I can remember years ago when I was on the board of the Marin Interfaith Council, listening to the prayers and the teachings of the different traditions that were represented by the other people on the board. They were very lovely people, each and every one of them, devoting their lives, as many of us have, to their faith traditions. And yet what struck me most about the growing friendship with one another was not our like-mindedness. We were not like-minded, but it was our like-heartedness. Just like that confluence is calling out to us to find, the great love, the great wisdom, and the great effort that it's going to take to find our way home together. So since most of you have probably heard quite a lot about the Buddha's teaching, offered most succinctly by the Dalai Lama as a religion of kindness, what I want to share with you today comes from the other direction, from the well of inspirations of our dear neighbors in the Abrahamic tradition, the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims, who no doubt would agree that they, at their best and in their highest values, are like-hearted and devoted to kindness. So the particular version of that kindness that I have come to learn more about in the last few months is from the Quaker tradition, which, like Zen, has made its own unique interpretation of the wisdom and compassion teachings of their founders. So in looking at the shared values of our two ancient traditions, what I was particularly struck by is a basic tenet, that each and every one of us is a spiritual being. We Buddhists call it our inherent Buddha nature. The Quakers call it our inner light. Once we humans have accepted that premise that everyone is inherently equal, there naturally follows what many wise humans have done over centuries. They form intentional communities of like-hearted people, just as the Quakers and the Zen Buddhists are doing together right now. Both of our spiritual communities, as they are being formulated today, are based in the spirit of inclusion and in cultures of diversity, a culture of diversity that has become more and more inclusive in its views, as each of us widens our own personal lens to see who or what we have been leaving out, who or what has been marginalized, and how. I think we're all aware of the disturbing news about the most current dangerous uptick in hatred against other people, in particular toward those who are beginning to question the imposed cultural standards for their own gender identity. This targeting of the trans community is adding to the long list of those already historically hounded out of clubs, housing, and jobs, both in this country and throughout the world. Women and girls, people of color, indigenous people, Jews and Muslims and Christians, gays and lesbians, the elderly, the poor, and those who are physically or mentally ill. The very people that both Jesus and Buddha said we are here to serve. As a young girl in grammar school, I was only allowed to wear skirts and dresses, same in high school. Our skirt hems were measured by the Dean of Girls to ensure they were below our knees. Once I arrived at San Francisco State at the age of 18, my own sense of who I am, who I love, and how I choose to appear leapt out of the closet and will never return. So I was deeply moved to read among the Quaker values that we welcome all cultures, backgrounds, and difference in an environment that promotes mutual respect, acceptance, cooperation, and teamwork. In other words, they welcome me. And that's very important to me. And they also welcome all of you. And as a Buddhist, that's even more important. So these values for the Quakers are not based in some belief or truth, but rather on a set of goals that they refer to as testimonies, abbreviated by the acronym SPICES, SPICES. And those spices fit very nicely with Buddha's values. And they are simplicity, peace, integrity, community, equality, and stewardship. The Quakers tell us that theirs is a way of life rather than a set of beliefs, and that every day is sacred, or as we say, every day is a good day. They say a life led in service of good deeds is a good life. We say doing good, avoiding evil, and living for the benefit of others is essential to the salvation of humanity. Since the Quakers arrived in America from Europe in the 1650s, they have upheld these fundamental values, and as a result inspired many in this country toward pacifism, as well as playing a key role over the centuries in both the abolitionist, women's rights, and civil rights movements. One particular value that I have experienced since joining with a group of friends who are helping to set up a resident council for all of us who will soon be living together at Enso Village is the practice of listening carefully to every voice. The so-called truth can come from any person present at any meeting. The priority for each of our meetings is to truly stay connected, to stay in relationship with one another, as challenging at times as that may be. So it's not me or one of them that has the best answer. The best answer arises from the light that's already there within the gathering itself, just like now. The all-inclusive us. The best decision is the one that will serve the whole, both inside and outside the boundaries of this community or this city or this country. As I've often said to the new students here at Green Gulch isn't my community or your community. It's our community. We have a farm and a bakery. We have a zendo and a maintenance shed. We care for this land and for each other together. We are Green Gulch Farm. And whatever we are is for the benefit of everyone. We don't vote. There are no winners or losers at the end of a meeting. And our meetings take a very long time. A good outcome is when all the participants feel that they are part of something larger than themselves, much larger, like this planet and its precious resources, both human and more than human. The third great river of life itself, of reality itself, all inclusive. As our founder Dogen Zenji says in the Sutra of Mountains and Rivers, it is not only that there is water in the world, there are worlds in the world of water. And it is not only in water that such worlds exist. There are worlds of sentient beings in clouds. There are worlds of sentient beings in wind. There are worlds of sentient beings in fire. There are worlds of sentient beings in earth. There are worlds of sentient beings in the world of Dharma. There are worlds of sentient beings in a stalk of grass. And there are worlds of sentient beings in a Dharma staff. Wherever there are worlds of sentient beings, the world of Buddha ancestors inevitably exists in that place. So in other words, the world of nature is the universe showing its true form. To look at nature, to look at all of you in this room right now, is to look at the truth itself. Everything we see and are is the true form of Buddha, of awakening. Is the mountains and rivers preaching the sutras? And I would bet that the Quakers would agree with that. And still we need to ask our all too human selves, how do we find our way into seeing and then doing what we know is right? As all the world's religions well know, it is not so easy. Seeing or doing what is right, practicing what we preach, is not so easy. So how to see and do what is right was the primary instruction that our founder, our founding ancestor, Dogen Zenji, gave to his students once he had answered his own burning question about that inner light or Buddha nature that both the Buddhists and the Quakers have assured us is there, or rather here, right here, inside each and every one of us. The inner light is what we use to see ourselves and to reflect on whether or not our actions are aligning with our own values. Seeing ourselves and feeling the impact of our actions on others is not something any of us does easily. One of our basic instincts is to protect ourselves from what feels like a criticism, or in the extreme case, an attack. Another of the values that the Quakers and the Buddhists share is finding a way to live that takes away the occasion for violence. Fighting among humans doesn't solve problems, it only causes suffering. At the same time, we need to learn skills that allow us to include conflict, the resolution of which can help us, both as a community and as individuals, to grow and to thrive. One of the criticisms that I would level against my own beloved community, the San Francisco Zen Center, would be a tendency among us for conflict aversion. I've been to many workshops offered here over the years that have been about conflict resolution, resulting in a document soon to be official and posted on our website called Conflict, Complaint, and Ethical Review Processes. At the top of which it says, the health of our community is measured by our willingness and our ability to find effective, responsible, and compassionate means of resolving interpersonal conflict, as well as tensions arising from violations of community guidelines. San Francisco Zen Center seeks to respond wisely and compassionately to all difficulties that arise by fully addressing the suffering of all concerned. Informed by Buddhist practice, this means valuing dialogue over silence, reconciliation over estrangement, forgiveness over resentment, confession over accusation, and atonement over punishment to the greatest extent possible. So of the many elements in our effort to resolve conflict, one of the useful tools that I was offered came from a workshop given at Google to its employees. I'm going to share it with you. So what I took away from that viewing was a 4-square diagram, like you try to imagine 4 squares, that helped me to understand the underlying structure that dominates our Zen Center, at least in my view. So the diagram, as I said, 4 squares. There's a vertical line representing cares for people. Down here, not at all. Up here, tremendously. Okay? And then there's a horizontal line representing direct communication. Over here, not at all. Over here, extensively. Got that so far? Okay. So in the bottom 2 squares, don't care for people. If a manager or a crew head doesn't appear to care for people, on the left is insincere manipulation, meaning without any direct communication. For example, talking behind someone's back or asking someone else to tell them something. And then to the other side is obnoxious aggression, with lots of direct communication of the sort none of us appreciates hearing. Yelling, throwing things, insults, sarcasm, and so on. So that's doesn't care much for people. So above the line, where we do care about people, I believe we find Zen Center there, and probably most of you there. We do care for people. We even take vows to care for people. The only missing piece is how we do that. To the top corner, on one side, not much communication, is ruinous empathy, which made me cringe in recognition. Ruinous empathy occurs when caring for people is missing direct communication, or what we commonly call timely feedback, job reviews, reflections, criticism, or critique. This last one, critique, is my own personal favorite. It's taken from the art world. And a critique is given to others to help improve the art form with the consent of the artist, whether it's dancing or music, or cooking, gardening, drawing, or Soto Zen ritual. On the other side, the last square is called radical candor. And it's that one that I think we are all in need of cultivating. Radical candor in a Buddhist context is given kindly and in a timely fashion. Part of the skill of engaging in radical candor has to do with a deep sensitivity for the feelings of others, along with a deep wish to benefit them. One of the tenets of radical candor is that when offering a critique to someone who you are teaching or managing, any negative comments are given privately. For example, we don't wear shoes in the Zendo. I have given in a whisper to a person wearing shoes in the Zendo. On the other hand, when the critique is positive, you give it publicly and out loud. For example, thank you, Timo and the senior staff, for taking such good care of us during COVID. So this simple diagram has been encouraging to me as a way of reframing how we can best form a community that feels safe enough and welcoming enough for all of us, not only to learn, but to thrive. Radical kindness and warm-hearted candor freed from malice of any kind. There's a phrase that I heard when listening online to the presentation by two elders of the Quaker community that they call holding in the light, which also resonated for me as a shared value. Each of us as equal members of our communities has a responsibility to hold one another in the light, to be aware and responsive to the situation that we are in, and to offer whatever support we can to one another. One of the students here told me the other day that they were literally moved to tears as they were driving one of the farm vehicles toward a gate in the garden. And another student who was walking nearby, without being asked, opened the gate, waited, and then closed it again once the vehicle had gone through. It's no big deal, or a very big deal. Each of us gets to decide. One of my own fondest memories from the years I spent at Tassajara took place in the kitchen, where I had been assigned to be a guest cook for the summer season. The work was real work, and the days were real long, and everyone was really busy with the task. I had lifted up a heavy soup pot to transfer the contents into another big pot, and at the very moment that I realized I needed a long-handled spatula, one appeared right over my right shoulder, as if by magic, which it truly was. The magician's name was Brian, and he is indelibly entered into my heart as a caring friend. Brian was a person who was very quiet most of the day, shy and self-effacing. And yet to me, he was awake in the only way that really matters, caring for others. The last story I want to share this morning has to do with my first conscious encounter with my new best friends, the Quakers. I had seen the movie Friendly Persuasion as a teenager, maybe some of you have as well, with Gary Cooper as a Quaker elder, and the challenge he and his family as pacifists and abolitionists were faced with during the American Civil War. And then a number of years later, when I had been at Zen Center for about maybe 8 or 10 years, I was asked to go back east to live with an elderly woman that our former abbot had been taking care of by sending students to live with her for a year as an assistant. Her home in Old Westbury on the north shore of Long Island had once been part of the Whitney estate, one among many huge estates on the East Coast established during the founding centuries of our country. What was left of the Whitney estate when I arrived was a golf course with its repurposed mansion as the clubhouse. The elderly woman I was sent to care for had purchased the carriage house of the estate, which is a lovely, modest home built a century and a half ago when the entire estate was a single family residence. On my days off, I enjoyed taking the car and going shopping, which included a lot of driving around the back roads of Old Westbury, trying to figure out where I was and what had gone on and since the founding of this area in the 17th century. What happened here? Most of the roads ended in a dead end with signs reading private property. And then an even larger yellow sign every now and then with a huge black arrow pointing to New York City. Go home. So during one of my outings, I happened across a small village green with modest homes around the perimeter, including a few shops, a library, a bookstore, and a pharmacy. So I was really curious about this odd little town in the middle of one of the wealthiest suburbs still in America. So I went into the bookstore and I asked the kind lady, "Where am I?" And she said, "You are in a traditional Quaker settlement." So like that spatula coming over my right shoulder, the site of that village has not been forgotten all these years later. And I find myself opening warmly to the values and lifestyle of these gentle farmers and shopkeepers who have held to their own faith and values like oysters clinging to the rocks above the rising sea. So to end, I want to share a short poem about oysters by Dogen Zenji. Gokyo ge Betsuden. Intuitive awakening outside of the teaching. The Dharma, like an oyster, washed atop a high cliff, even waves crashing against it, a reefy coast, like words, may reach, but cannot wash it away. The Dharma, like an oyster washed atop a high cliff, even waves crashing against the reefy coast, like words, may reach, but cannot wash it away. Thank you very much. Do we just, what do we do now? After the question. Okay. So it's your turn. If you all have any questions, I'd be very happy, or comments, to hear them. This is now a Quaker meeting.
Would you pick the question up?
Oh, raise your hands. There we go. Gentleman here.
How do you deal with persecution amongst conflict in that square?
Yeah, good question. I think for me, I have to calm down first, because if I'm feeling persecuted, if I'm feeling offended, I learned many years ago that if I feel offended, I become offensive. So as a person practicing not to be offensive, I try to calm down. So I try to bring my own activation back into a more neutral state. And then I try to be as honest as I can and speak from my own experience. Like, this doesn't work for me. What you just said doesn't work for me. Or this conversation isn't working for me. Maybe we could speak later. So somehow not getting into blaming, like, you rat, you just, not getting into fighting, but doing what I can to avoid conflict. And it's hard to do, not easy, because we're pretty reactive. Thank you for your question. Do you mind waiting for the microphone?
Thank you, Fu.
Good morning.
Good morning. I was curious in terms of your comments about Zen Center and trying to introduce more kind conflict. Do you have any specific recommendations in terms of how that could be affected?
Yeah. Well, I think my experience is oftentimes we talk to each other about somebody, what they're doing. Did you notice it's on something? But we don't tell the person. So sometimes we do. It's not always, but it's hard, to give people feedback, particularly, or I hate the word feedback. Sounds like you're eating on them. Reflections. you know, particularly if they're not saying, you know, I often will say to me, may I give you a reflection? May I offer something to you? And if they say yes, then I'm careful about what I say. And if they say no, I say, well, maybe another time you'll allow me to do that. Right? So something to do with being sensitive to feelings is, you know, as soon as somebody says, can I talk to you about something? My heart starts to pound, you know, I'm sure it's going to be something bad. So part of the dynamic is exchanging self for others. I know this is going to be challenging to hear this thing that I want to say to you. And I really want to respect that. And I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our friendship in doing that. And it's my responsibility. I have responsibility to the community to let you know what we've been talking about in relation to your conduct, let's say. I don't have a specific example in mind, but, you know, I mean, people are pretty nice here. This is not like, you know, major warfare or anything. Usually it has to do with, you know, Zazen attendance or something, conflict at work, conflictual relationships, and or missing the guidelines, not really honoring the guidelines, which we do try to share right away with people. Expectation. Yeah. But it needs to be done fairly within the time frame of when the thing happened. If you wait too long, it's sort of like, well, that was 6 months ago, or that was 3 weeks ago or something. So it's helpful if we're ready to do that quickly and kindly. Yeah, yeah. There was a woman behind. Yeah.
Hi, Boo.
Hi.
It's Heather, Leslie Katz's daughter.
Oh, hi, hi,
Hi.
hi.
And hi,
Yeah.
Grace. We're here today with the kids in our family.
Yes,
I just
I
wanted to say
see
mainly
you.
thank you for your kind and beautiful spirit and your teachings and your words.
Mm.
And being here today, we raised our kids. They went to the San Francisco Friends School, a Quaker school. And your words and your eloquence of weaving the communities together is so beautiful. And these guys grew up since they were 5, sitting in what the Quakers call meeting for worship silently. And as parents, to watch that when your 5-year-old toodles into a room and sits silently for 30 minutes is quite spectacular. And it's just a gift to be back here in the Zendo with you, and good luck to you and those going in your future.
Thank you, Heather.
In your new community.
May I share our relationship?
Yes, yes, of course.
Heather and her lovely family. Heather's the child of my art teacher, from whom I learned critique as a gift. Her mother was a magnificent teacher, taught children art and me, and some adults she was willing to take on very late in life. And she taught me how to draw, and how to really be open to comments about my drawing. Like I'd drawn this apple. And she said, well, now put it up on the sill there, and everyone put your art up there and we'll critique it. And I said, oh, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to put my apple up there. And she said, no, it's okay. It's okay, do it. So I did. And then someone said, you know, if you put a little gray shadow right under the apple, it'll come down. So I did. And sure enough, the apple was on the ground instead of in the air. And it was such a joy to be helped by my fellow artists, and we helped each other all the time. What a gift. Your mom was a gift. What a gift. Yeah. We were going to have a celebration of her life here, and sadly COVID hit just at the time we needed to have this space, and we couldn't. So I'm glad you're all here. It's wonderful to have you. Thank you for coming. I must have known. So yeah, great. Any other Quakers in there?
What do you have any advice for being in a situation where maybe there is no resolution to the conflict, and how you can still hold kindness and compassion for the other person, even though you may never be like-minded or like-hearted?
Kind of like that. Yeah. Holding kindness for them, you know. in your own mind, I wish you well.
Mm.
We won't be able to be together anymore. I know we're going different ways now, and I just wish you well. And that's sometimes it's hard if there's been, bitter conflict or, terrible, we all know terrible things happen between people, often the closest people to you. So sometimes it takes time. I've done a lot of good work on family members who aren't even alive anymore, and I keep doing the work. And we talk and we have a little, and I remember, sitting in the kitchen, watching my mom make biscuits, and this kind of love starts to come in to my stream of consciousness. That was there anyway. Just have to keep bringing that back, and not well, when you said that to me, when I was 18 and deserved it. So yeah, it's a job. Forgiving and not forgetting. I don't think that's good. But to really work it back in to your own wish to be a kind and loving person. Okay. Would you mind handing that to the man behind you?
Thank you. One thing that seems to keep people in general, and certainly sometimes myself, from that ideal box in the 4-box quadrant of direct and compassionate communication is the fear of, I think, a disconnection or an angry response from being direct by the other person. And I'm interested in how you think about that and working with that concern.
Yeah, it happens. It's so awful when people get mad at you. I just hate it. And, before I got into more leadership positions in the community, where I had the job of telling people that maybe they had to leave, the worst of all, for whatever reason. And I would say very rarely did they thank me, and it felt personal. I remember someone once said, Zen Center did this to me. And then I said, Zen Center is not a person. You probably talked to somebody. Who did you talk to? Who was it you talked to? So, if it was me, well, then probably I hate Fu. She's the one who hurt me and so on. So I think it takes a while in those dynamics where there's something, you just don't want that. Even if I did it nicely, you don't want me to tell you that you have to leave. So you may end up, your hurt may cause you to personify that hatred onto me. And it's just painful. And as a parent as well, my daughter gets so mad at me. Sometimes I'd cry and she'd cry. And, now she's 30 and we're pretty good friends. So there's nothing easy about any of this, I think, but I think not doing it is the ruinous empathy. Boy, that one really got me. I think it's harmful. I think it causes great harm too. So if you think you can avoid harm by not giving feedback, you can't. So better to kind of face to face with a cup of tea and as kind as you can be and honest as you can be.
Thank you.
The A team.
Hi, dear Fu.
Hi, dear Grace.
I remember from my days of Quakerism that there was as much emphasis on consensus building as there was on conflict resolution. And in Zen Center, that's something that I saw as always being problematic, meaning where did the institution come down on the side of consensus building or on the side of conflict resolution? Because if you've got conflict and if you're trying to build consensus, you should have some consensus about conflict and what is right. Where do you come down on that side?
Well, I think that document that we've created is pretty good. It's a little long. So I think one of the problems with constitutions or declarations or principles is if they're not easy to remember, or if you can't actually find a working method, like how do we get to a consensus? How do you and I get to consensus? You know, or the three of us or the four of us, how do we do that? You know, I think it does have to do with being intimate with each other, staying in the room, having a certain permission to speak freely, not get personal, and not kind of personalize the conflict, but keep bringing forward your own ideas. And then I think with the Quakers, I've been appreciating how they arrive at consensus. I mean, you must know that better than I do. Is I think they have a method called, when it comes to organizational decisions, consensus plus one. So one person can say, I don't agree, and that's still a consensus. But one person can't stop the entire group from arriving at what the next step is going to be. So I do think there are these well worked out ways. And my experience of meeting with the folks who are setting up the standards for living together at Enzo Village are really looking closely at Quaker consensus building techniques, which we've also studied here. I mean, we've had Quakers come in and tell us about how to hold a meeting. We already know how to be in silence, so we got that. So I think there's so much common ground that we can learn from their experience over hundreds and hundreds of years, and our own wish to live in a collaborative way. So it's a work in progress. It's not a document. It is it's our living together that's going to be the proof of the pudding. So I'm eager actually for this next experiment. I've never been in a situation in my life where everybody is new. We're all moving into a new place. It is just being built at the same time. Well, a little bit of overlap, but within 2 years we'll all be there and new to each other. So it's kind of fascinating, what's going to happen. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'll let you
Good
know.
luck.
Thank you very much.
Good luck.
I may be calling you for some advice.
Luck.
Yeah. Hey,
Thank you, Fu.
how
Thank
you?
you, Fu, for this morning very much. I feel moved to give this example in this company, especially when you were talking. It's a true story. 15 years ago at the Redwoods in Mill Valley is the setting. 2 men in the community were at war. They were both very, very smart, wealthy, well-educated, cultured people, and they always got into it, and it was causing trouble in the dining room and wherever they went. So one of the men said to the other, let's go to the fireplace. And the other man that day, after about 2 years of this, agreed. I think it's important about the fireplace. They went to fire. They went to warmth, and there was a sofa in front of that fire. And the gentleman said, let's sit down. And here's what they told us later, is that their agreement was that first time that they would just sit. They're not family. They didn't know each other. And that they would agree to sit every Sunday at 8 o'clock. And no one could give up they agreed, no one could give up except to give warning that was a month's warning. And if they couldn't talk, they would just sit in silence. So at any rate, very carefully, one of them started to talk, and it was, I'm feeling, not I know. What do you think? And it went back and forth. Okay, now I come on the scene. I'm witnessing this in the library. the aura around it, the feeling was immense. It was just so big. I won't go into the politics, but it was huge, believe me. So anyway, I went up to them before they got started and asked if I could just sit behind them and listen and not interrupt and just feel what I could learn by what they were doing. And it was an incredible, I would say, education that is constantly needing to be learned, as you said, but it was a timing that worked for them. And I'm going to kind of emphasize that, because I think timing for us in life and the timeliness of anything is perhaps most important. And it's hard to decide it sometimes. Are we ready right now to do this? Do we need to say next week, 8 o'clock? Do we need to say, I'll see you at the next birthday party. Let's try to sit together, or whatever. But the timeliness, these men continued for 4 years and remained amazingly good friends. And they let other people too come and sit behind them. So it was an education in communication, all of which we've heard other people and ourselves talk about. Do you have any wisdom, Fu, around timeliness? You've mentioned it while you were talking, the timing.
Well, the first thought I had was, I don't know what time it is. Which wasn't, I think, to your question, but yeah, it is something like knowing where you are in terms of time and space, and in terms of how you feel ready for something or not. But I think it's an internal, time is a manufactured construct, human construct. There's no time, but there's a kind of a feeling of a kind of seasonal, maybe perhaps, like, I think it might be time for me to, I might be ready. I might be ripe, like fruit ripens. You don't know what time it does, but you can see it, you can feel it, you can witness the timeliness. So maybe by not engaging in a timely way with something, we're kind of breaking the law, natural law, I would say. So I like your story, and I think that's something maybe that we can all keep in mind, that, if you have, maybe none of you have anyone you're in conflict with, that would be really nice. But if you do, that might be a way to ask them, would you sit down with me just quietly? And we just sit together like the Quakers do. It's like, wow. If you haven't seen Friendly Persuasion, by the way, it's so sweet. It makes me cry every time. I looked at little snippets of it the other day, and this song, Friendly Persuasion, is a beautiful song too. Pat Boone's version in particular. But thank you, Audrey. I will think about it, and I'll let you know if I come up with anything more than that. Okay, you're welcome. What time is it? Where did the Eno go? Oh, you're there. You're so tricky. You're so tricky.
I think we have 4 more minutes.
4 more minutes. Okay.
I had a question, actually, if you
Okay.
like.
Yeah.
I think one thing for me, like observing conflicts at Zen Center over the years, my own and other people, one thing that felt really eye-opening to me was to look at people's values, because I was really, at first I was like, why is this conflict even happening? And then I like, oh yeah, this person has a completely different value in this situation than me or someone else. So I was wondering if you had anything to share on that note of just having different values, and maybe how to hold that.
Yeah. I think we have these, what is it called? The guidelines for community conversation that we got from, what's that called, Linda? Like, you try it on as the first one. And agreements for, Yes, 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 thank you. Multicultural agreements for conversation. How we talk together. And the first one is try it on. So if you hear somebody say something that right away you're going, well, that's just stupid, you know. Okay, that's your first response, and then first responder. And then there's this secondary, like, okay, now be patient with that. You heard yourself already, so you know that's what you think. Now give it a chance, you know, give it a chance to soak in. And why don't you listen to them a little more? And why don't you ask them some questions? Well, what is it that's important to you about what you just said? I'm really curious. I don't understand. So rather than knowing, you know, which is what that first response is about, I know that's wrong. It's more like, I really don't know. And I think I almost always find that by the end of that kind of inquiry, I'm much more open and I'm more deeply understanding of why the person is feeling that way and where it's coming from. And, you know, it's always connected to family trauma, or it's something where they got hurt, or just something. If it's emotional, there's some deep roots there, and that we share those deep roots. So I think we have so much more in common that we can draw on than our differences. Our differences are so superficial, really. So I would say mostly you want to ask questions about those values. Is that what you did when that happened?
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
What did you do? You remember?
No, I think I also asked question, but I, for me, what I mean, more as an internal process, even as a first step, was just really helpful to become aware that there's a discrepancy in values in this situation, which just I think helped me to like just really open up and be less judgmental about where the person is coming from. You know.
Yeah. Good. So you're working back toward the judging one.
Right.
Work with that one first. Yeah, that's a very good idea. Maybe always. Thank you. Thanks for your
Yes.
question. Good. Okay. Thank you all very much.